The first time I ever felt safe in my life, I was 4 years old, asleep in the back seat of my father's pickup, while he drove us home through a January whiteout off the lake. The last time my father ever felt safe, he was 89, gripping my hand in the back of a neighbor's car, while that same kind of snow came sideways across the windshield. 50 years between those two drives, and the lesson never changed once. When it counts, you show up. He taught me that before I could spell it. And on a Tuesday this past winter, I finally learned which people in my own family had taken it to heart, and which one of them never had. My name is Garth Renner. I'm 66 years old. I spent 38 years as a millwright at the plant up on the river before it closed, and I've lived my whole life within 20 minutes of the same stretch of water in the Kawarthas. I coach nobody anymore, and I fix everything myself. And for a long stretch, I was the kind of father who believed that not making waves was the same as keeping the peace. It is not. It took me until this past January to understand the difference, and it cost me a daughter to learn it. But it gave me my father back, clean and whole, for the last good while we had. I'll take that trade every day of the week. Let me tell you about my dad first, because you can't understand the rest of it until you understand him. Hollis Renner was a quiet man who said more with a nod than most people manage in a paragraph. He worked the line at the same plant I did, came up through it in the days when a handshake was a contract and a man's word was worth something. When I was a boy, he flooded the backyard every December with a garden hose, out there in his parka past midnight, skimming the bumps off the ice so I'd have a rink to skate on before school. He drove me 2 hours each way to tournaments in Lindsay and Peterborough, and never once complained about the gas, or the cold, or the early mornings. When my skates split a seam, he stitched them himself at the kitchen table, with whack thread, and a curved needle he kept in an old player's tin. He sat up the night my mother passed, 22 years ago now, and he didn't fall to pieces. He grieved the way he did everything else, with his chin up and his hands busy. He kept her garden going for 2 decades after she was gone. Tomatoes, runner beans, the whole back fence of them, because she'd liked the look of it. In all my 66 years, that man never once phoned me to say he was struggling. Not after Mom died. Not after the hip. Not the winter the furnace quit, and he wore his coat indoors for 3 days rather than bother anybody. So you have to understand, when my father called me at 6:20 on a Tuesday morning and his voice came out wrong, slurred and soft like he was talking around a mouthful of wool, I didn't stop to weigh it. 89 years of a man like that doesn't raise a son who hesitates. It raises one who's already pulling his boots on before he knows what's wrong. Welcome, if you're new here. This is Dad's Cold Revenge, and this one's true, and it took me a long time to be able to tell it without my voice going. Do me a favor and let me know down in the comments which part of the country you're watching from. I read everyone. Hit that like button, and if these stories mean something to you, subscribe, because there's more where this came from. Now let me back up to that morning. It was the 14th of January, 6:20 in the morning, still black outside, and the snow had been coming down steady since around midnight, the kind of squall that rolls in off the lake and doesn't let up. I had the kettle on. I'm a T-man, my father's son, and the radio low, the local station already warning people off the highway because of a pileup out past the cutoff. My phone went on the counter, and I saw Daddy on the screen, and my stomach dropped before I even answered. Because Hollis Renner did not call at 6 in the morning. He called Sundays after church, and that was the whole of it. Dad Garth. A pause that went on too long. Something's not right with me, son. His words were thick. Wrong on the left side, like the muscles weren't answering. Dad, talk to me. What's going on? My arm. And my... He stopped. Can't get the words to come. Face feels funny. Heavy. I knew. You hear those 4 things together. The speech, the arm, the face, the time of it. And you don't need a medical degree. I'd taken the first aid course at the plant a dozen times over the years. I was already moving toward the door with the phone jammed to my ear. Dad, listen to me. Don't move. Stay in your chair. I'm calling for help, and I'm coming. You hear me? Sit. Stay put. Don't make a fuss, he managed. Too late for that. I hung up and called 911 with my hands shaking, and I want to be clear about this part, because I've gone over it 1,000 times since, and I'd do it the same way again. I called them first. A dispatcher named. I'll never forget her calm. She took the address out on the Marsh Road, and then she went quiet for a second, and I heard her checking something. And when she came back, her voice had changed. Sir, I have to be straight with you. We've got a multi-vehicle on the highway, and the squalls grounded a lot of the road. Nearest available unit is coming from the far side, and they're estimating 35 to 50 minutes in these conditions. If you have any way to transport him safely yourself, and you're confident you can, that may genuinely be faster. The regional stroke center is 40 minutes door to door on a clear day. Every minute matters with this. 40 to 50 minutes for an ambulance. My father's brain dying by degrees out on the marsh road while it took them. My own truck, a 2014 F-150 I should have replaced 2 winters ago, was sitting dead in my own driveway. It had refused to turn over the night before in the deep cold, just clicked at me, and I'd left it for the morning, 'cause the mornings when you deal with those things, of course it was that morning. And here is where it starts. Because there was a vehicle, a good one. A 2-year-old Honda CR-V with all-wheel drive and a full tank, parked warm in a garage 11 minutes away, belonging to my daughter. I want to tell you about her too, but honestly there isn't as much to tell, and that's part of the wound of it. My daughter is 41. She and her husband do well, better than I ever did, and they live in the new build-up on the ridge with the heated floors and the 3-car garage. She is my only daughter. My son's out in Alberta and has been for 15 years, good man, but he was 3 time zones and a closed highway away that morning and could do nothing but pray. So it was her. She was the one with the car and the closeness and the blood. I called her. 6:26 in the morning. It rang 4 times. Dad, it's not even what. Not a question. A flat what, the kind that's already annoyed before it's heard anything. Grandpa's having a stroke, right now. My truck's dead and the ambulance is 45 minutes out because of the storm. I need your car. I'll come get it, or you drive. I don't care which, but I need it now. There was a silence on the line, and I've learned the difference between the silence where somebody is reaching for their keys and the silence where somebody is deciding how to say no. This was the second kind. I could hear it in the quality of the quiet. Dad, I can't this morning. We're driving down to the city at 8. We've had this booked for months. The Leafs box, the dinner, the whole, it's Brad's clients. I can't just not show up. I thought I'd misheard her. The wind was loud at the door. He's having a stroke. Your grandfather. Right now, I heard you. Her voice didn't even climb. That was the thing that I keep coming back to. It's stayed level. Call him an ambulance. That's what they're for. I told you, they're 45 minutes out. He hasn't got 45 minutes. Honey, please, I'm asking you for a car. A sigh. Long and put upon, like I'd asked to borrow money I'd never pay back. He's not my responsibility, Dad. I'm sorry, that's harsh, but it's true. You'll figure something out. You always do. I'm not blowing up a whole weekend we've planned for half a year over this. Take a cab. Call somebody. I have to get ready. And then, and I swear this is exactly how it happened, she said, it's not my problem, and she hung up the phone on her own grandfather having a stroke, and the line went to that little dead silence, and I stood in my kitchen in my sock feet with the snow ticking against the window, and I understood something I had spent 41 years not letting myself understand. There wasn't time to feel it. I put it in a box and I shut the lid. I'd open it later. Right then I had one job. 3 doors down lives Stan Petrowski, 73 years old, retired off the same line I worked, drives an old Buick LeSabre that he keeps cleaner than his own kitchen. Stan and my father go back 50 years. They were at each other's weddings. They buried wives the same decade. They still split a Mickey of rye on Grey Cup Sunday. Stan was at my mother's funeral in the front row in a tie that didn't fit him. He picked up on the first ring because that's the kind of man he is. Garth. Bit early, Stan. Dad's having a stroke. Ambulance is buried in the storm. My truck's dead. Can you drive us to the regional? There was no pause. None. Not 1 second of it. Be at your door in 4 minutes. Get his coat and his health card. I'm coming. That was the whole conversation. No conditions. No what about the snow. No I had plans. No let me think. 4 minutes. He was in my driveway in 3.5 with the Buick already warmed, and the snow brushed off, and we drove out the marsh road through that whiteout at a speed I wouldn't have dared alone. Stan's old hand steady as a surgeon's on the wheel, the wipers going like a heartbeat. My father was in his recliner when we got there, listing to one side, the left corner of his mouth pulled down, but his eyes found me, and they were still his eyes. Knew you'd come, he said, and the words came out crooked, but I understood everyone. I got down on my knees in front of his chair, and I took both his hands, and they were so cold. Course I came, Dad. Course I did. We're going to get you fixed up. Stan's outside, Stan. Something's moved in his face. A kind of peace. Good man. We carried him to the Buick between us, Stan and me, this man who used to lift engine blocks, light as a sack of kindling now, And Stan drove us the 40 minutes to the regional stroke center, while I sat in the back with my father's head on my shoulder and told him about the rink he flooded and the tournaments in Lindsay and anything I could think of to keep him with me. He squeezed my hand once, weakly, every little while, just to tell me he was still there. We pulled up to emergency at 7:05. They'd had my 911 call flagged, and they were waiting at the doors with a chair. A nurse named Brenda, broad, no nonsense, the kind who's seen every worst morning 100 times, had him inside and into a bay inside of 2 minutes. A doctor, Dr. Anand, calm and quick, ordering the scan before my father was fully through the doors. You did the right thing not waiting on the bus, he told me, not slowing down. The window for what we can do here is narrow, and you got him inside it. Sit tight. I'll come find you. Then they took him through the doors and I couldn't follow, and I went and sat in the worst chair God ever made, under those lights that hum, and Stan went and parked his Buick, and then came and sat down beside me without a word and stayed. He bought me a Tim's from the machine in the corner that tasted like a mistake, and I drank it without tasting a drop of it. My phone sat in my hand. There were no messages on it. Not from my daughter. Not a single text asking, is he alive? Is he okay? What hospital? Nothing. She was, I worked out later, getting her hair done. If you've been with me this far, do an old man one small kindness. Tap that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, and it tells the people who decide these things that stories about showing up for family still matter. Hit the like while you're there. Now stay with me, because the morning was only the half of it. They worked on my father for the better part of 3 hours. A clot, the scan showed, caught early enough that the medication they could give had a real shot. Around 10, Dr. Anand came out and crouched down to my level the way the good ones do. He's responding. The deficit's already pulling back. His speech is coming. His grip's returning on that side. He'll need rehab, and we're keeping him several days, but Mr. Renner, if you'd waited the full weight on that ambulance, we'd be having a very different conversation. The next while is good. You got him here. I put my face in my hands for a minute, and Stan put one of his on my back, and neither of us said anything because there was nothing that needed saying. By noon, they had Dad settled in a room and let me in. He was propped up, gray but awake, the droop in his face already softening at the edges, his right hand back to mostly working. He saw me come in, and his eyes went sharp the way they always did when he was about to land a line. Took your time, he said. The words came slow, but they came whole. Traffic, I said, and we both laughed, and his laugh turned into a cough, and Brenda came and fussed at him, and he waved her off like a man swatting a fly. We sat a long while. I held his hand and didn't say much, and then he turned his head on the pillow and looked at the window where the snow had finally quit, and the light was coming flat and white off the parking lot. And without looking at me, he said, very quietly, she didn't come. It wasn't a question. He'd been clear-headed enough through all of it to know exactly who'd shown and who hadn't. I didn't lie to him. I never could. She had a thing in the city, I said. Hockey. Dinner with her husband's clients. My father nodded slow and kept looking at the window. He didn't get angry. He didn't say her name. He just nodded the way a man nods when a long arithmetic he's been doing in his head finally adds up to the number he suspected all along. And something settled into his face. Something I recognized because I'd seen it on him exactly once before. 22 years ago, in this same hospital, the morning my mother died, when he'd decided what kind of man the rest of his grief was going to make him. It was the look of a man who has made a decision and is at peace with it. He didn't say another word about her that day. We watched the news together with the sound on, and he beat me twice at the trivia they run on the noon hour, and I drove home that night in Stan's Buick. Stan refusing to so much as let me chip in for gas, and I should have been wrung out, and instead I felt strangely level. Like a long-jammed window had finally come unstuck. My daughter texted me at 9 that night. One line. Glad Gramps is okay. Heading to bed, big day. Talk TMW. I read it 3 times. There was no question mark anywhere in it. She hadn't asked which hospital. She still didn't know. The next morning I went back to the hospital, and my father was sitting up in his own pajamas. He'd refused the gown after the first night, which I respected to my bones, with the globe folded to the crossword on his lap and his reading glasses on the end of his nose. His voice was nearly all the way back. Garth, get me my checkbook and my address book from the house, he said, before I'd even got my coat off. Top drawer of the bureau, under the war medals. And then get me a phone with a charge in it that works better than this one. Dad, you need to rest, Wesley Garth Renner. He used all 3, the way he hadn't since I came home smelling of the Legion at 17. I have done nothing but rest for 2 days. Now get me my book. So I got it. He found a name in it, in handwriting that had gone shaky over the years but was still his, and he had me dial a number, and a woman answered Doucette and Associates, and my father said, "Maureen, it's Hollis Renner. I'm in the regional. I had a bit of a stroke. No, I'm fine. I'm grumpy," which my son tells me is the same thing. Listen, I need to update my will, the whole arrangement. Today, if you can manage it. I've got some very particular changes, and I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. There was a professional kind of silence on the other end, and then Maureen Doucette, who'd done my father's affairs for the better part of 30 years and my mother's before that, said she could be there by 2. He hung up and went back to the crossword like he'd done nothing more than order a sandwich. "Dad," I said. My throat had gone tight. "You don't have to do anything for me. I didn't do any of this for that." He didn't look up from the paper. He filled in a word, deliberate, and set the pen down. "I'm not doing it for you, son. I'm doing it because I've spent 89 years on this earth, working and saving and going without, and your mother right beside me, so that what we built would land somewhere it mattered. I've earned the right to say where it goes." Now he looked up over the glasses. "And I've finally figured out where it doesn't." Maureen Doucette arrived at 2 on the dot, a brisk gray-haired woman in a good wool coat with a leather case and a pen that probably cost more than my dead truck. She shook my hand, nodded at me like she understood the gravity of the room, and pulled a chair up to my father's bed. I sat in the corner, quiet, a witness and nothing more, which was all my father asked me to be. I won't put down everything that was said over the next 40 minutes, because some of it belongs to my father and isn't mine to give away. But I'll tell you the shape of it. My father's whole life was about to be redistributed. There's the house on the river that he's owned free and clear since before I was grown. There's the retirement savings he and my mother built $100 at a time, across 40 years, the kind of careful money that people who never had much learned to make. There's his truck and her sewing things and the box of war medals. And there's the cottage. If you're Canadian, you'll understand what the cottage means without my explaining it. It's a little post and beam plus up on the lake that my grandfather built with his own hands in 1951, that my father added the screen porch to in 78, where 4 generations of Renners learned to swim off the same dock. It is not worth a fortune on paper, though the way lake prices have gone these days I suppose it is now, but that was never the point. The cottage is the heart of the family. My daughter, for 15 years, had been talking openly, at Thanksgivings, at the Christmas table, to anybody who'd listen, about what she was going to do with the cottage when it came to her. New windows, a bunkie, tear out the old dock. She'd already half spent it in her head. By the time Maureen Doucette clicked her pen shut and slid her papers back into that leather case, the cottage, the house, the savings, all of it, every line of it that my daughter had been quietly counting on for the whole of her adult life, had been signed over to people who showed up. The house and the savings to me and to my son in Alberta, split even, the boy who couldn't get a flight but phoned the hospital 9 times the day Dad came in. The cottage to a trust, so that it stays in the family and can never be sold, with the upkeep paid out of a fund my father set aside for it. A bequest to the Regional Hospital Foundation, the stroke unit specifically, in my mother's name. And a separate check, written that afternoon to Stan Petrowski, because my father said a man who shows up at 4 in the morning in a snowstorm with no questions asked has earned a place in the will of anybody with sense. My daughter was left exactly $1. Maureen Doucette told me gently that this isn't cruelty, it's law. You leave the token so there's no question the person wasn't simply forgotten. It's the legal way of saying I saw you and I chose this. She found out 4 days later, and not from any of us. She found out because she could not help herself. She phoned Doucette and Associates on her own, the way she'd done once or twice before over the years, to check on the timeline for the cottage paperwork, as if it were already hers and just a matter of process. And the young woman who answered the phone, following the new instructions on the file, told her politely that she was no longer named as executor, and that any further questions would have to come from Mr. Renner directly, and that she wasn't able to share the contents of the estate. Nothing more. But it was enough. You don't get told you've been removed as executor unless something underneath it has changed. That's when the calls started. My phone rang at 4 in the afternoon and it was her, and I let it go. It rang again 2 minutes later, and again. By that evening she'd called me 41 times. I counted them later, scrolling up the list, 41 little entries of her name stacked one on top of the other like a confession. The voicemails went from confused to wounded to furious to something almost frightened. There was one where she cried. There was one where she told me I'd manipulated a sick old man. There was one, and I'll be honest, this is the one that finally closed the door for good, where she said, low and ugly, that she'd always known the cottage was promised to her and that I'd stolen it. Promised. As if love were a contract and she'd been holding the paper all along. She came to my house on the Friday. I was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold when her CRV pulled into the drive. The very car, you understand. The one that had a full tank and all-wheel drive and was 11 minutes away. She came in without knocking, the way she always had, and stood in my kitchen with her coat still on and her face working between anger and fear in a way I'd never seen on her. What did you do? She said. What did you let him do? I didn't get up. I didn't raise my voice. I'd had 3 days to find this stillness, and I wasn't going to spend it on shouting. I didn't let him do anything, I said. Your grandfather is of perfectly sound mind, sharper than you or me, and he made his own decision. You can ring Maureen Doucette yourself if you doubt it. He sat up in that bed and he decided where his life's work was going to land. That cottage was supposed to be mine. Her voice cracked on it. You know that. Everyone knew that. Nobody promised you a thing, I said. You assumed it. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. You assumed the cottage, and you assumed the house, and you assumed it would all come to you no matter what you did, because that's how it had always worked. You'd take, and we'd let you, and nobody would ever make you pay for it. I turned my tea around in its saucer. He had a stroke, sweetheart, on a Tuesday morning, and I phoned you, and you had a car, and you told me he wasn't your problem, and you hung up to get your hair done for a hockey game. The color went out of her face slowly, the way water drains from a glass. I didn't know it was that bad, she said. You didn't ask, I said. That's the whole of it. You never once asked. Stan Petrowski asked. Stan's 73 and not a drop of our blood, and he was at the door in 4 minutes. Your brother, 3,000 kilometers away, phoned that hospital 9 times in one day. And you couldn't trouble yourself to find out which hospital your grandfather was dying in. She started in then, the way I half expected, on the old grievances. That she'd never felt as wanted as her brother. That her grandfather had always been gruff with her. That there were years of small hurts I didn't know about. And maybe there were. I won't sit here and tell you my family was perfect, or that the old man never had a sharp edge, or that everything balanced out fair across 41 years. People are complicated and grudges are real. But I looked at my daughter standing in my kitchen, more upset about a cottage than she'd ever once been about the man who built it, and I understood that whatever the ledger of old slights, none of it had anything to do with a phone call on a Tuesday morning when a man could not get his words to come. You can carry every one of those hurts, I told her. Some of them might even be fair, but none of them put you in that car the morning he was dying. You decided that, the same way he decided this, clearly on purpose, and without asking anybody's permission. She didn't have anything for that. She stood there a long moment and then she left, and she didn't slam the door. And I'll tell you the same thing my father once told me about my mother. The not slamming is what tells you it's over. A slam is heat. A quiet door is a decision. My father came home from rehab 3 weeks later, walking with a cane he despises and using to point at things, his speech all the way back save for when he's tired. He's at the cottage trust paperwork now, fussing over the wording, making sure the dock gets fixed and not torn out. The grandchildren who show up will have it, and the ones who don't, won't, and that's the whole of his philosophy, and I've come around to thinking it's a sound one. The other night, he had me up to the house, and we played Okier at the kitchen table, the two of us and Stan like we've done 1,000 times. And somewhere in the third hand, my father set his cards down and looked at me over his glasses, and he said, You know what the worst thing you can do in this game is? Garth Renege, I said. Renege, he agreed. Failing to follow suit when you've got it in your hand. Holding the right card and choosing not to play it when you're called. It isn't losing. Everybody loses. It's reneging. You had what was needed, and you wouldn't lay it down. He picked his cards back up. Some people renege their whole lives and never once get called on it. And then one day somebody calls. We finished the hand. Stan and I beat him, and he accused us both of cheating, and we drank a rye for my mother the way we always do, and the snow came down outside the kitchen window, the same lake snow that's been falling on the Renners for 100 years. I drove home late that night under a clear, cold sky with the heater going and an old country station turned low, the kind my father used to hum to in the garage on Saturday mornings, and I let it play. I wasn't angry. I want you to understand that, because for a long time I thought the end of a thing like this would feel like rage, and it doesn't. It feels like a window finally pushed all the way open in a house that's been stale too long. The cold comes in, and it's clean, and you can finally breathe. I'd spent 41 years telling myself my daughter just needed time, just needed grace, just needed me to keep smoothing it over. The stroke didn't teach me that was wrong. It only turned the light on over something that had always been there. A man can spend his whole life keeping a peace that was never really peace, just quiet, just the absence of anybody saying the true thing out loud. My father said the true thing from a hospital bed, with half his face still not working. And I finally said it back, in my own kitchen, to my own daughter, 66 years and one snowstorm too late. I don't know if she'll come around. I've stopped needing her to. That's the part that surprised me most, not the anger, not the grief, but how light a man feels when he finally stops waiting at the bottom of the stairs for somebody who was never going to come down. If this story landed somewhere true for you, do me that favor. Like it, leave a comment and tell me where in this big country you're watching from, and subscribe so the next one finds you. There's always a next one. Loyalty leaves a legacy, and the people who show up are the people who get the cottage. I'll see you down the road.